I'm Rick McGuire, the executive editor of Cardiosaurus World News. And you know, you may have thought that you left report cards back at 8th grade, but as our guest has tried to explain to everybody, that's really not the case for physicians today. I'm with Matthew Phillips, who is president of Austin Heart. And Dr. Phillips, it was a great session looking at how can these report cards be used to drive quality. How bad are the report cards? Are they something to be fearful of or something that can be very helpful?
Well, I don't think, physicians are used to getting A's. And so when you talk to them about going back to school and getting report cards, sometimes physicians get a lot of anxiety because you kind of reminded about going back to medical school and studying for a test. But, really now the delivery of cardiac care is very complex. And all of us try to do the best care we can. But quite honestly, sometimes we don't do it because we simply just forget or get too busy. And every other industry has put mechanisms in place to make sure that quality is delivered. You don't get a product off the assembly line of a car where they just say, well, let's just build a car and see how it turns out. They have steps along the way to ensure that quality is being delivered. The report cards are just more of a structured way of reporting. And what they really do is drive mechanisms and processes that ensure that the care is delivered correctly. Unfortunately, healthcare is one of the only areas left in our society where the consumers are left with sort of a blank slate. It's very similar to, going on an airline. You decide to go on a flight and you're going to put your life in the hands of a pilot. When is the last time you asked the pilot for his credentials? Well, you don't. So in the absence of meaningful data, you assume quality. Well, the airline industry has done pretty well, though. There's not a lot of plane crashes. And so since they've performed that well, people can assume quality. Unfortunately, if you look at healthcare, we do not have the same quality record or the same consistency with lack of variability that the airline does. If we could deliver healthcare with the same reliability as the airlines do to get you from one place to the other and actually to get your luggage, we wouldn't need report cards. So this is the first step for us to begin to develop metrics in advance that we can follow. And the real goal of this is not to penalize anyone or give them a failing grade. The goal is to say, okay, there's an area that perhaps needs improvement. What could we put in place? A great example of this is very often when I talk to my colleagues, we'll say to them, do you follow protocols, for example, to suggest defibrillators for patients who have diminished ejection fraction, who might need them? And the response we always get is, yeah, absolutely, I do it all the time. Well, then using your EMR, you start pulling up all those patients who have a low ejection fraction who don't have a defibrillator. You go back to the cardiologists who are very competent, have multiple board certifications, and you say, well, what about these two people? Did you talk to them? And the answer is, well, I forgot, or I missed them. So to prevent that, you have to build things into your data systems that will let you track your data. The main issue, though, the data really has to be point of service. Half the cardiologists in America are above age 50. And we see a lot of data, a lot of patients. What we're hoping to get to, I think, is real-time point of service processes that will allow you to get a good report on the report cards.
Now, if you get something on your report card that says there's a deficiency, you've got some seniority. How do you feel when you get a report like that?
Well, I think it's, personally, and since I run the group and I believe in it, I think it's great. I mean, in my particular world, I've been called by younger colleagues who've said, gee, we've reviewed your ultrasound readings, cardiac echo, and you missed a few things. Let's talk about it. That means the system is working. So basically what, we will see very often is an opportunity for improvement. Feedback is a gift. If you really want to be a professional and you want to deliver the best health care you can't just say, I'm a good doctor. You have to prove it. Because it's not as simple as saying, I flew from New York to Vegas and I didn't crash the plane. I mean, because this is a longitudinal care of very complex illnesses, we have to develop surrogates and metrics that can support the fact that we are doing the best thing. I don't really think physicians are concerned about the negative feedback. I think the concern is just being overwhelmed with the processes involved to keep track of the data. That's the problem. I think if a physician had, through the use of an EHR, real-time feedback to do the right thing, I don't think anyone would have a problem with it.
I mean, physicians tend to be the smart kids in the class. So, I mean, I would think that some kind of feedback like this would actually be they would be receptive to it.
Well, the key is the measurement tool has to be reasonable, meaningful, and measurable. Very often when physicians get bad reports, their first thing is to say, well, the report must be wrong because I can't be, right? So you have to get past the idea that the measurement tool is wrong. No measurement tool is perfect. You have to adjust over time to improve it. And once you get past some of the emotions of a negative score, then you get to, okay, this is not about you and your ability. It's usually a process problem. You know, because no one willingly makes mistakes. I mean, so, but I think the challenge we have now is there's so many reports, and each payer has their own report, and then you have registries, and they're all different. And what's going to happen is there has to be a consolidation into one or two type of reports that are easily tracked, computerized, point of service. And they have to be transparent, meaningful, and measurable. I mean, think about it. You can buy a car, go online, and in about 10 minutes before you go to the dealership, you have looked at 3 or 4 different types of cars. You've seen head-to-head comparisons, and you've seen the data that's reasonably good about their performance, their efficiency, their cost, and their safety. And the car industry is pretty good about making reasonably good cars because they have report cards internally that they use. Now, physicians may bristle at some of that because they'll say, you know, healthcare is not the same as making a car. But, you know, we know clearly physicians will do the right thing when they remember. And if you audit physicians' charts, well, very often you will find, I mean, in our group alone, we asked our doctors, have they followed up on patients with carotid stenosis greater than 70%? And we were shocked to find out by scanning the EMR how many patients were not followed up. And actually, we put a process into place which recently saved a man's life. It developed a tracking mechanism to make sure that people with aortic aneurysms were followed up. And a man just was called, and he was called, and he was called, and he kept showing up on the list as not coming back. Eventually, we did reach him. He'd been out of town. He had a 9-centimeter aneurysm, totally asymptomatic, and got operated on the next day. He would have died. The only thing that saved him was we realized we needed a systematic way of following up patients that didn't rely on the physician's memory. It started with a scorecard. How are we doing at following up vascular disease? The score was bad. We were doing a bad job. You put processes in place, do a better job, and now you save someone's life. And that's not by any cardiologist doing anything differently. That's simply by using your data systems effectively to manage a disease.
So these scorecards, they're here now and they're going to stay as far as you're aware of?
Well, I think clearly one of the solutions, at least in my mind, and I'm not a healthcare policy expert, is we need the consumers to participate in their healthcare. I think clearly having a system where you have payers, providers, and consumers, where the consumers are totally divorced from participating in their health care because they have no data from which to choose, is not going to be a long-term solution. And so, yes, to give the consumers, and the consumers are the federal government, the commercial payers, and the patients, they need data. But the data is not to see who gets an A. The data is to help physicians so that everyone gets an A. Because ultimately, all of us are above age 50, and we're going to be patients. So, so we want it's not just for us as a provider. We're going to be patients, and our families are patients. It's to take out the variability in healthcare and give it this. And someday, hopefully, when you go pick your cardiologist, you'll have the same concerns you do as when you pick your airline pilot. You'll want to know who's easy to get into and who has the best peanuts, I guess, in the waiting room.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. I appreciate your time.